Welcome to the LinkedIn Famous Podcast, the show where we get real about what it takes to build a personal brand on LinkedIn that gets real business results. We're talking about driving revenue from a personal LinkedIn profile by sharing real and authentic stories and points of view. I'm Brad Zomick, your host and the founder of Spectrumer, a personal brand consultancy that helps founders and executives get LinkedIn famous. Join me for unfiltered conversations from the trenches of LinkedIn. We'll meet CEOs, go-to-market executives, subject matter experts, and company employees with blockbuster LinkedIn results. We'll unpack strategy and leave you with tactical advice to grow your personal brand and demand for your company's products and services. All right, LinkedIn hustlers, it's time to level up. Hello out there, LinkedIn movers and makers. Today I'm excited to have a friend and an amazing guest on the show, Melissa Moody, to share with us her LinkedIn story. Melissa has a really awesome background. She spent almost 13 years at Google, which seems like a lifetime. Then she transitioned into the startup space. She co-founded and was the CMO of Gated, an email SaaS. She was also the host of Two Pizza Marketing, a popular podcast in the B2B marketing space. Most recently, she was the GM of Matcha, a matching software for communities. She also hosts a podcast called The Joy of Connecting. Melissa, welcome to the LinkedIn Famous Podcast. It's great to have you. Is there anything you'd like to add to that intro?
There's one other bit, which kind of currently is my biggest focus on LinkedIn, which is I founded a company called Wednesday Women, specifically to have an impact on LinkedIn feeds, to get more executive women showing up in people's feeds and to be amplifying the impact of these incredible executives that maybe you don't hear as much about in your feed based on the history of LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yes. How can I forget that? Maybe the most important thing.
That's probably what we're going to spend most of the time chatting about. So that's okay.
That sounds like a good plan. Before we get into that, can you tell us something about yourself that the audience couldn't learn from your LinkedIn profile?
At one point, this might have been a moment of LinkedIn famous, was I got caught on camera at an excellent kind of in-person event recording content creation session, doing an imitation of a raptor, like a dinosaur raptor. It was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever done. And yet it appears quite a bit on LinkedIn. I think some of my old teammates have made it into kind of a meme of sorts. Something you might not learn on LinkedIn is I love doing accents, doing impressions, doing things like that. That is only something you're going to see if you have me out late at night in an after party. It's something you may not find on LinkedIn.
I feel like I need to change my plan for next year. I'm going to go to more marketing events where you're hanging out to see some of this. I do think in the age of videos becoming hot, you might have to infuse some of these impressions into your content.
This whole put my face on video is so cringe for me. I know it's what's happening and I've played around on TikTok and I definitely don't want to be the marketer who's hiding in the corner in the shadows. It's hard to see yourself and hear yourself on any kind of video content. It's very difficult.
Tell me about it. I try to listen to yourself on a podcast or a webinar. It's just weird. You have your own podcast. Do you ever get used to it?
I don't think so, no. And I will be honest, the first podcast I ran, the Two Pizza Marketing one, I loved it because my co-host, we had two of us as hosts and we wouldn't host on the same episode. We would do opposite episodes. I would speak with a guest and she would speak with a guest. And it was great because I would listen to her episodes. Because personally, I really hate listening to my own episodes. I will do it to improve, but I'm very self-critical.
I think we all are. I think it's just imposter syndrome rearing its ugly head. Let's talk a little bit about your LinkedIn journey. I started seeing you popping up on LinkedIn during the early pandemic. Was that around the start of Gated, or was that before? What were the motivations and what inspired you to start investing in LinkedIn?
I was at Google for a very long time, almost 14 years. I actually used to work as a volunteer service. I used to work with veterans who were transitioning into the workforce. We used to have to explain what the heck they did in the military in the real world. I felt the exact same when I left Google, not comparing Google to the military in any other particular way, other than you're in this giant bubble. When you're there for that many years, you're in it. So everybody I knew was at Google. All my mentors, all my leadership that I looked up to was at Google. Were these people posting on LinkedIn? Absolutely not. There was an entire different world. And when I emerged into the startup world, when I started with Gated, I essentially looked at LinkedIn and said, "Oh, I need to quote unquote refresh my resume," and realized, wow, LinkedIn is no longer just about your resume. And it is no longer just where you go when you job search. There's so much going on here. So you're absolutely right. When we were building from the ground up with a startup with Gated, it was one of the paths to create interest, brand awareness, and a presence when you're starting from nothing, when you're small. You've really got to look for the smartest ways to grow organically. And in the B2B space, obviously LinkedIn is a strong place to do that.
Did it have a big impact on the growth of Gated?
Absolutely. The model that I follow, and I don't know if this is an official term or whether we coined it, but I used to call it circles of influence. At Gated, when you start out and you have essentially zero users, you need to think about how you grow through the people that you touch. At the core of it, it's your leadership and your employees. Just beyond that, it's your advisors, maybe your investors, people who are deeply involved in seeing your startup succeed. Beyond that, you have, of course, you've got your users. When you have users, you want to celebrate them. Our whole strategy with Gated's content approach was showing how amazing our users were. A lot of our biggest lovers of the product weren't out shouting and posting on social media all the time. They were trying to get their work done in a very focused way, which meant that what we did was we would showcase them and say, look at these people doing incredible things, and they're very focused. Investors, advisors, employees are all tight. You've got your users. Then, of course, you have your evangelists, people who maybe aren't even your users, but they love your mission. That, for me, in all the startups I've worked on, has been a huge lever to growth. Those people can really be activated on LinkedIn. You can give them nudges to post on your behalf. You can show them what you're doing with the brand so that they amplify it even organically. Certainly at a certain point, there's also paid influencers. We didn't use any paid influencers for Gated or Matcha, but it's definitely a component of that circles of influence when you're on a social media platform and looking for how your teeny company with 3 employees, how do you talk to lots of people? You've got lots of people talking on your behalf.
I love that concept, the different types of people that you can activate, get excited, and become advocates for you. I'm curious, when you first started with LinkedIn, were there some challenges? What was it like in the early days?
I'll be perfectly honest. I'm a person, and I've been coached into doing this more, even by my mentors, even at Gated. I remember my longtime mentor at Gated, he consistently coached me into what he would say, tooting my own horn more. I am someone who values the work. I value doing the thing. I personally put very little value on talking about doing the thing. Even on my own work, I see it as a stick DS. I just do. So when I first showed up on LinkedIn, I couldn't help but see everything that I was seeing as just a bunch of egos with a bunch of BS. I was thinking the people who are really doing the work, they're not here. They're not here talking about it. They're out doing the work. That was the mental mindset that I came to LinkedIn. And it definitely has come through a lot of reframing, but that was what I showed up with. So in my mind, I was like, why would I do this? Why on earth would I post? I think the first reason I started posting was specifically on behalf of the company Gated that I needed to grow. My reason to start posting was you need to get this company in the eyes of more people. One of the best ways to do that is through not just my page, but my team's page, my advisor, the whole circles of influence I spoke about. Over time, my reasons for posting on LinkedIn have shifted, but I do think that the absolute only reason why I started posting was for the growth of Gated as a company.
That's a great point. These days, a lot of founders might start resonating with that, especially when they see there's so many stories of companies that had almost no name
Mhm.
and their founders took to LinkedIn, sharing stories, the good, the bad, the ugly. Some of those became very big. Pavilion, Catalyst, Databox, Chili Piper. Crazy to say, but maybe in this day and age, being on LinkedIn as a founder might be a fiduciary responsibility.
I would agree. I think if you meet a founder who's not posting anything publicly, it feels like a extremely low bar, especially with everything that we're able to do today and the ability to scale it. Strategy to posting as a founder is not that hard. It can be pretty straightforward. If you're not doing it, I agree. It's a little bit of a why not moment. Founder led brand, 100% effective. Absolutely.
What is your system or any resourcing to put this in place when you were at Gated or maybe more recently when you were at Matcha? This is an initiative that once you start it, you can't really stop.
I think it's twofold because I think for anyone who's on LinkedIn, there is going to be an element of planning and tooling that comes tied to your business goals. If you are trying to grow a company, you're going to be thinking about, how am I tagging partners? How am I engaging on comments from people who might be potential customers? There's a definitely distinct business lens to posting on LinkedIn. The other half is, how do I, Melissa, personally decide to show up? My tools that I use, the strategy that I use, bring those two together. I think it's important because they can be slightly different in nature. For example, engagement. I think the easiest thing that everyone should be doing, if you don't want to post, I think the baseline is simply engaging on other people's content. I would always start there. Frankly, I find the most value in it as an individual and for growing a business. If we were to split it up between the business and the personal, I have a target list of customers that I think would be great for my business. I am going to be following them. I am going to be watching what they post and actually commenting valuable responses on their posts. Two tools that I will call out that work really well for me there. The first is a tool created by a wonderful man named Alex Boyd called Aware. I use Aware because what it can do is I can give it the list of companies that I want to follow or individuals that I want to bring into my orbit from a company growth standpoint. I can see all of their posts right there easily and comment on them instead of scrolling through LinkedIn or going account by account to find what they're posting. It just makes it so much easier to comment on those. The second is actually a tool that we developed when we were at Gated. It's called NutTree. It's something that I and my CTO from Gated had built into a public tool. What it allows you to do is, we've pivoted a little bit, but when we first created it for Gated, what you could do is, if I saw a thread by someone who had a problem with their email, because Gated was in the email space, I could share that thread with my advisors and my evangelists, my customers that were big advocates, and they could go post on it. Having tools where you can get good, engaged commentary in a smart, effective way, I think those are critical if you're going to be thinking about growing, like being on LinkedIn to grow the business. For me personally, the thing I will say is the must-have for me on my own is a really good and easy way to capture content ideas. I just use a Notion doc. Every time there's something I want to post on, or let's say I did a podcast episode and there were 5 different one-liners that could be potential posts. I drop those 5 one-liners into 5 different placeholder posts in my social calendar. Then I have this infinite list of ideas of things that I could later post about. So I'm never running out of ideas. For me, I would say the 2 critical tools from a personal standpoint are, one, an easy calendar management. Mine's in Notion. Use whatever you want. And GPT. And I could talk about how I use that. I do not write my posts with ChatGPT, but I do use it to help me stay on track, get inspired.
Awesome. You just dropped a ton of knowledge on us. So I want to just break it down a little bit. I love how you started with engagement first. And most people sleep on engagement. They're just thinking, I'm going to write a bunch of stuff and I'm going to put it out there. It's easier to start with commenting first for a couple of different reasons. You get used to the platform. You develop your networking muscles because it's more like Twitter than ever. You have to give before you get, or you have to create conversations that people coming back to you. There's no cap to what you can do in commenting.
Yeah. Just start seeing what people are saying. In your search, you can still search on the hashtags. You can search on terms. You can search on other companies that are in your space, other thought leaders in the space that you want. There's so much you can do just engaging before you've ever posted a darn thing.
That's right. Start there before you start writing. I also loved when you were, by the way, Aware, very cool tool. I'm a fan too. I love how you talked about the concept behind NutTree. I think one thing people don't realize is that, especially when you're in a team setting, it's one thing to create the content, but the people in the company or your circles of influence that are your friendlies, maybe it's your investors, it's your friends, they're your first line of distribution. It's great that you can have immediate engagement and that kind of gives more visibility into your content. The last thing I wanted to reference, another great suggestion. I talked to a lot of people that are, I don't know what to write about, I don't know where to start, or just feels daunting. I love the fact that you have, and I've used Notion calendars before, where you have a brainstorming idea repository, a calendaring tool all in one. Notion's a great starter point, especially it's for personal use. It's basically free. They have these, you use a Notion database calendar.
Essentially, yeah. It's just so easy to put in a placeholder with no date. It's just an idea. Then when you sit down, you need 100 ideas. You just assign them different, oh, I'm going to do this one on Monday and this one on Tuesday. It's just so nice to dump things somewhere. Because, you and I I'm probably going to come up with ideas based off of what we're chatting on today. I'll go drop them into 2 potential future posts. I don't have to drop them this week. 2 weeks from now, I'm like, what am I writing about? Oh yeah, Brad had that great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. You tag Brad and you like tag the show and it keeps building. It's just cumulative.
I love that. Let's talk about where the rubber hits the road. Obviously, it's so much easier to write when you write from a place of abundance and you have a bunch of ideas. What does your system look like for creating that content? That's like the going to the gym of LinkedIn. What does that look like for you?
Personally, I will start by saying I love to edit. I am an editor at heart. I am not a writer. I will readily admit that I do not like to sit down and write. That is very hard. One of my favorite self-help books, I read it all the time and I'm still never good at it. It's called The War of Art. It's fantastic. I believe it's Stephen Pressfield. It's excellent. It just talks about that struggle of creation. It's a wonderful short read. I think self observation is critical as you get into that. I think that's an important part of the process because I know that I can edit all day, but I struggle with writing. I've done a lot of work to make the writing part easier, capturing ideas when I have them. If I sit down to just write for an hour and I have nothing down, it's going to be a brick wall. If I've got a list of ideas, I know that helps. That's again where ChatGPT comes in because I can say, here are a bunch of things I'm thinking about writing. Give me a couple of bullet points that would get my juices going. Again, I don't post anything that has been written with AI. I use it to get that flowing because that is my sticking point. Once I have an idea, I can get it out on the paper. I can edit it really quickly. I will also say personally, do not overstructure what I post on LinkedIn. That is conscious. I do not write with tricky hooks in mind. I do not post something because I know it's going to create rage bait and discussion. I just on principle don't want to be chasing the algorithm. I don't want to spend my time trying to win against the algorithm by tweaking my writing. So I know a lot of people work really hard at that, have wonderful lessons in that. Fantastic. My personal choice is to not spend my valuable time on that. I write things that I believe will have value for others to learn from. I sometimes write things that have value for me to reflect upon, to put out into the world. My third kind of thing that I write is celebrating and amplifying others. It's really the foundation of what Wednesday Women was built on. It's the foundation of all the other marketing that I've built as well, which is how do you raise up others in a positive light? How do you give shout outs to businesses that are doing well? How do you call out founders who are creating something incredible? You'll see with my posts, it's much less about me, oftentimes about ideas that I got from folks that I talked to. Something I saw that's really interesting and thought provoking. I personally find it easier to write about something else that someone else is doing. That tends to be my other trick.
I like that trick. I agree that sometimes the ideas don't flow. Unlike going to the gym, when you show up to whatever it is for carving out an hour to write, just showing up sometimes doesn't work. You need to harness your motivation. I love that you use it as a place to journal. I agree with you there. Sometimes it's so that you're just hashing things out in your brain. I also love the fact that you're elevating others. We can talk more about that in regards to Wednesday Woman. You mentioned that at Gated, LinkedIn was pretty impactful. What other ways has it impacted your career? Since you started investing in LinkedIn, what other interesting things started happening?
So many. The two that come to mind right away is, first of all, career growth, which I think is what I first thought LinkedIn should be. It wasn't in the sense I thought it was, where I will post a resume, I will spot jobs. It was not that. But all of the connections that I've made have shaped every step of my career. My time at Matcha, that came because of connections that I built through Wednesday Women, through the B2B folks that got me in touch with the CEO of Comstor, Mac Redden. That led to my work at Matcha. And putting myself out there on LinkedIn in general led to connections that absolutely shaped my career. I also think probably most importantly, it's given me friends, people that I would actually say are my friends, you included, of course. Some of them I've never met in person. The joy when you actually do get to meet them in person is so fun. Pavilion's last GTM event in Austin was crazy to see so many people in the flesh. I feel like I've known them for 2+ years. We know each other pretty well through conversations, supporting each other. I think LinkedIn has really impacted me, not from the company standpoint, not just from the career standpoint, but also from a friend group. I have built incredible marketing leadership peer support that I would not have had otherwise. I have built incredible founder circles. When you're a founder, you need more than anything else to talk to other founders. It's given me a support network that I did not have before. As I mentioned, when you're in a large company, you can be very insular. When you come out of that company, you feel very lonely. It really provided the support network that I really needed upon leaving a large company like that.
That makes a lot of sense. After all, it is a social network.
It is.
We've talked about this in the past. You actually have shared that you have a wealth of knowledge of creating on LinkedIn. You actually don't love it that much. You can dig a little bit into the deeper motivation there and how that translates to what you're doing at Wednesday Women.
I do think some of my foundational dislike of not just LinkedIn, posting on social media in general. I do not have public accounts on other social media. I dislike it. I don't like putting myself out as something of interest to others. That is personal. I do think it's founded in a lot of what I was raised on, what I value, which is, again, to mention, like, the work matters, not talking about the work. That is this thing that I grew up with. Maybe that in today's world that can be negative, but I still believe that is what matters to me. I don't care about talking about the work. However, what I realized, specifically, one of the reasons we founded Wednesday Women is that this is a broad generalization. So come at me, folks, if you want to. But women especially are not as likely to speak about their successes, to speak about their achievements. We put a lot of work out into the world. We work very hard, then we move on to the next thing, or we just accept that the work was done and that's the reward. We actually did a really interesting study at Wednesday Women that partnered with a kickstand. I can share their information, but it's called Balancing the Boardroom. It looked back actually at childhood messaging, just the percentage of difference between women and men who, when they were children, were told to be brave versus quiet, or helpful versus courageous, out and living large. These kind of like things that are inside us that say, you don't need to be speaking loudly about your achievements. I think when anybody comes to LinkedIn for the first time, I think it's very apparent that there is a very clear gender divide between those who will just shout loudly about how awesome they are and all the great success they've had. I bet there's going to be a clear gender difference when you look at those posts. Now we're at a point where I think everybody's posting on LinkedIn. You can still see some of the difference in the type of posts. Like I mentioned, I like talking about others, or I like talking about reflecting on my journey. I don't like saying, check out this growth, check out what I did, how many dollars I grew the company by. There's a real difference in the posting. One of the reasons, to answer your original question, I don't like posting on LinkedIn. I do it for one main reason. That is for other women who are either coming up in their career, not even women, other people who are coming up in their career who say, why would I post? Why do I have anything that anybody would want to hear? I want them to feel comfortable sharing, because that's the content I want to read. I don't want to read about some guy who did something that is unattainable. He probably did it in a sketchy way. I want to read about the struggles in finding where you're headed in your career. I want to read about the unconventional way that you unlock some growth. I want to hear about a conversation you had that really made you reflect. I find that fascinating. By posting it, I hope to encourage others to post. Again, it really isn't just women. It's just anybody who doesn't want to show up as the traditional B2B egotistic, like loud and in your face poster. I think we've turned a bit of a corner. Getting called out now when that happens. I don't really think most of us like to see that. Feels like the authentic content is swelling. Would you agree with me?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. A few weeks ago, somebody posted a list of the top creators. It was all men. That person got called out almost immediately. And what was heartening is that within 24 hours, multiple women had put out posts about 10 other creators that were women. I do agree with you. There's still like a pretty big divide. I've looked at some of these lists on some site called Favicon. You can look at top influencers. It feels like it's a little bit skewed, and it's mostly men. It mostly, maybe for the reasons men are more likely to step up and put themselves out there, maybe brag. I think what you're doing at Wednesday Women is amazing. And I hope it creates more women who are trying to be like Alina from Chili Piper. I think she's doing some cool things. She does a lot of posts about her family. I would like to see more of that. Do you see that similar divide as well?
I do. I think the hack that we have with Wednesday Women is the same hack I use for myself, which is if you struggle to show yourself in that role, to put yourself in, it feels like bragging. And maybe it's not, but it feels like bragging. It feels like speaking about yourself. I do think the hack is just to amplify others. It's very easy to point at someone else who's doing amazing things and say, wow, check them out. That is what Wednesday Women was founded on, is these women are out there kicking ass. They don't have time. A lot of them don't have time or the bandwidth to be here shouting about how awesome they are. We're going to do it. That's the whole premise. I think it's not only more fun, but it's also a great strategy for growth. People want more excellent folks to follow. They want to hear about examples of awesomeness.
True. That's why I'm doing the podcast. I get to talk to awesome people like you versus me just in a bubble talking to myself.
The best way to get LinkedIn content, because we have so much to think about and you have people to celebrate. It's great.
Great point. You talk to a lot of people who are admiring your presence. They probably want to follow in your footsteps. What advice do you have for somebody who navigated a transition like you did? They were at a company, they were inside a big cog in the machine where people in big companies, they log in once a month, let alone people like in the B2B marketing and sales community who are here every day spending an hour or something like that. What do you tell those people who are looking to get active on the platform?
The first would be what I say for almost everything: marketing, hosting a podcast, everything, which is start with your why do you need to be there? If you know your goal for being on LinkedIn, what you do is going to follow. The amount of times you're going to post, the type of posts you make, the content pillars that you're talking about is all going to follow based on what your why is. My why when I first started was to get awareness for the company. It was very clear how I was to participate on LinkedIn. If someone is on LinkedIn to build their network for their career, very different. You want to think about how you position yourself, the engagement you do. Start with why would always be my first tip. The other one actually comes from an amazing woman that I had on my podcast recently, Kayvana Parker. She said, this was in relation to building your network. She said, start when you're full, not when you're hungry. That would be my advice for LinkedIn too. Don't show up at LinkedIn when you need something, or if you already need something, it's too late. Okay. My idea would be start doing this long before you're ever going to need to get eyeballs for your business or find a new career. Every time something happens because I was on LinkedIn, I wish I'd started doing it earlier. When you are in a job, don't stop posting on LinkedIn. Talk about the job, make connections, uplift other people, uplift your team. You just raised funds and you don't need to talk about your company anymore. No, now's exactly the time when you reflect on how did it go? What did I learn? Who can else learn from me? Not, I got to be in front of investors and get more funding. I think that's my second tip would be participate when you are in a not needing situation before you might really need to build connections for a specific.
I can attest to that one. It's funny being in-house in marketing. You're all about building up the CEO and the sales team, getting them out there, kind of social selling. If I could do anything differently, go back in time, I'm just going to post myself. This is back in 2017, all sorts of interesting conversations, trying to get people to do it back then. In the pandemic, the tide shifted a little bit and people saw guys like Sam Jacobs and Kevin Chu being out there on LinkedIn. They want that. They see it. They're hungry. They see that. So good point. I also love Start With Why. Great classic book also. Great advice. Question as we wrap things up. You spend a decent amount of time on LinkedIn. Who's inspiring you right now? Who are you following? Who are you learning from?
That's fantastic. First and foremost, especially because I respect the authenticity with which she shows up, Samantha McKenna has built a massive personal brand, also grown an incredible company based off of her work on LinkedIn. I would also place in that category the incredible Brianna Doe. Both of them are women who show up with all of the authenticity that I would hope to show up with. They've got huge audiences and they're building huge businesses on the back of what they've done. They have never once shown up in my feed in a way that made me go, oh, really? Like a framework for your great success? No, they show up as humans first. They do it in a way that doesn't feel like manufactured, which I think is very important. Honestly, I know it's not manufactured. I know it's them. I really respect what they're building.
Those are some great people to go and follow. I will be following them myself. Is there anything that you'd like to promote? Anything going on, your different projects?
I was definitely please follow Wednesday Women. I think our initial goal was to have more extraordinary executive women in people's social media feeds. That was the point. If you would like more women who are showing up and doing incredible things with authenticity. When someone says, do you know a CEO? It's not just the one or two that we all know. You have a slew of them. Wednesday Women is a great way to just up-level your feed every week. Go ahead and give that a follow. The other thing is I'm currently still doing a podcast called The Joy of Connecting. And it's been really fun because I'm really doing it at this point for myself and meeting incredible people who are super connectors. A lot of that is happening on LinkedIn. These are people who not only navigate networking in-person events or in their daily lives, or maybe even in the books and content they create, they're showing us how to do it well on LinkedIn. I tend to be meeting with a lot of folks that probably would be good for your show as well.
Awesome. Always looking for new and interesting guests. Thank you so much, Melissa. Such an amazing perspective and insights. Everybody go follow Melissa on LinkedIn. Check out our podcast. I'll be checking it out as well. Until then, let's stay connected. If you enjoyed this episode, follow Brad and Spectimer on LinkedIn for hot takes and tactical executive branding advice. For the readers in the audience, subscribe to LinkedIn Famous on Substack. And if you really loved this episode, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the podcasting platform of your choice. Until next time, stay bold, authentic, and keep on creating.